And we're live. Welcome everyone to another NPM Open RFC meeting. Today's date is Wednesday, May 5th, 2021. We'll be following along the agenda that was posted, I believe, in issue number 374 on the NPM RFC's repo. I've copy and pasted in chat the meeting notes talk. Feel free to add yourself as an attendee. And I will have to apologize for my internet. I hope it stays up throughout the meeting. But if not, I would ask if somebody could potentially try to record locally. I believe there's a few folks I can make co-hosts, and I'll do that now. And yeah, we'll be jumping into the agenda here. First and foremost, I want to give an acknowledgement that these calls, as well as any comms on the RFC's forum, or sorry, the RFC's repo, are covered under Code of Conduct. And these calls, we just asked that you be polite and respect when other folks are speaking. Please raise your hand if you have a comment and we'll call on you. And yeah, just be mindful and thoughtful of others on these calls. In terms of announcements, did anybody have anything that you want to bring up? Anything going on in the community? I know OpenJS World is coming up soon. For folks that are interested in that, I believe myself and potentially I think Roy Durno as well on our team, who's not here, is going to be joining, I think, one of the panels. So the package maintenance working group has a session, and I think also Wesley Todd, who's a part of these calls often, and myself are going to help try to run the first Open JS collab working group, I guess we're calling it, collaboration space for package vulnerability maintenance. So we've kicked off a repo there. I can share the issue, the tracking issue that we have for if you'd like to get involved and want to be a part of that call. The sessions are pre-recorded. So if you do want to jump on that call, and this will be the inaugural call for this collaboration space, feel free to add yourself there, and we're going to try to figure out a good time to pre-record that session. And that will go on as sort of a community focused session for OpenJS World. And if there's no other announcements, then we can jump right into the agenda. So the first item that we had here was PR 364, restore the NPM 6 ability to install one package at a time. I think Jordan also might have referenced something along these lines. And it looks like, Isaac, you were the last one to follow up here a couple of weeks ago. Did you want to maybe speak to this?
Yeah, I mean, I saw the error message and then, or the issue rather, and when I realized that's how it was behaving, somebody had been complaining about it in IRC as well. It sort of came out that it was I don't know if it's not clear to me how intentional the change was, like, or at least how thought through the consequences of the change were, even if it was intentional. Like what NPM 7 currently does is defensible, right? Like it's basically saying at all times I want to give you the best possible tree, but I think that it's surprising and like defies expectations if I ask a tool to do one thing and it does 7 other things at the same time. And in particular, like NPM 5, I think, is when it started to auto prune every time you install things. And that's super disruptive, especially if you're trying to build up a series of NPM links for development workflows, or if you're trying to manually install things one at a time to test different versions of things or just try things out. And so this seems like it goes more in the worst direction of that, of like continue, like it's telling me what my node module should be. And no, I'm telling you what my node module should be. You need to do what I'm telling you, not what you think is best. So it kind of just feels like It feels like a change that may want to be reconsidered.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that it was an intentional change that we always install the entire package tree. It's more, even if you tell us to install one thing, we'll actually install everything. It's more that it's more a ramification of the outcome of the way that we do add a new package to the tree, which is we say, okay, well, let's add this new dependency from the root package, and then do what we do, right? So, and then just do a reification, which is kind of just the simplest way to go about it. The thing is, now we just recently, not too long ago, added the ability to install just a single workspace. And what this will do, so the complexity, if you say npm install foo and we only install foo, well, foo depends on something, and that something is, also has to be installed somewhere, or else the foo you installed doesn't really work. And there may be deduplication or other things. We have to account for the fact that you're going to later install something else, and you don't want to have to shuffle more of the package tree than you need to. So we do still need to build the entire ideal tree and save that to the package JSON. But as far as what we actually put on disk, we have the capability now to limit it to just a particular sort of branch of the dependency graph. So we can say only install foo and all the things that are needed by foo and all of its dependencies, but nothing else.
And just to clarify, if I say install foo, I would never ever expect that to mean anything except foo and all of its subgraph.
Right. And so it may end up being that we are, limiting or deduplicating something based on what else we expect to later put in your package tree. So it's not the case, and this is something that somebody brought up, I think a while ago. It's not the case that npm install foo in a tree in a project with a package lock is going to be the same, guaranteed, as npm install foo in an empty project, right? Because if foo has a dependency which could be deduplicated by something else that's going to be in the tree later, we're going to give you that different version based on that context. So I mean, I think all of this, like, it's too much in the weeds for anybody to really care about. The fact is we should just do a filtered reification in those cases. Like that's the proposal. And I don't really see much downside of that. If you do npm install foo and you go, well, why isn't bar there? And you run npm install, cool, now everything's there.
Yeah, so this should be possible now with the changes that we made to Arborist to filter by node, right? So, so in terms
that's not
of
workspace specific from Arborist point of view. It's just you give it a node in the tree and it starts kind of traversing from there.
So action on our side for this would be to queue up the work to actually have update the cli install lib install to call the package, to essentially call Arborist with that package that you want to essentially like scope that install to.
Yeah, so
right?
well, there's two ways we could approach it. One is the CLI could pass in a filter nodes argument like it does for workspace installs. Or actually, I'm not sure if that's, I think Arborist just gets a workspaces argument and then it does the filter nodes thing internally. So I would probably suggest that this just be entirely contained within Arborist. Like if you give it some explicit requests, then it'll only reify the changes. Like if you give it an explicit add request, it'll only reify those.
Okay.
Basically use those as the filter nodes.
Okay, so would we be calling this essentially a fix when we ship this? It'll be update to Arborist, but is this essentially like, would this be a minor or would this be a patch in terms of the actual change once we actually add this?
It's that's a good question. It probably, what I just suggested probably is a sem for major on Arborist. If we want to do it as a sem for minor, then it would have to be a new field that you can pass into to reify, a new option you can pass to reify.
Right.
And the CLI would just start doing that if install gets some arguments.
Rebecca had a question here before we jump into the weeds even more just to get an action item out of here. Did you want to say it, or you want? I can say it on your behalf if you want.
I can.
Sure.
Yeah. So the behavior that Isaac's describing sounds the way I remember NPM5 behavior working, which is that you ask for a single package, it loads the ideal tree, it adds that dependency, and then it does whatever, additional, it does that one package into the result. And so I would expect that is to say it would then, find all the sub dependencies and so on for that and add them to the new ideal tree and then save that down to your lock file. So I guess I'm surprised that the actual user behavior changed. It sounds like it should be doing essentially the same thing that it was. Now this new thing where it'll only install the filtering thing sounds really cool, but is I think that would fix a NPM5 limitation as well. I guess because it's being reported as a bug in NPM7, I'm wondering what's different.
Right. So I think in NPM 6 it would, I guess what's reported.
It's like if you have an update now, right? Like we're essentially doing install and then update. Is that?
No, we're not doing update. We're doing a full install with the addition of the new thing you added, rather than only installing the new thing you added. If you have an empty node modules and a package lock JSON.
So it's like install and then install with that package.
Because my understanding of how NPM 6 worked is that it added it to the dependency list first, and then it just ran the normal install. It was as if you edited your package JSON to have that new entry and ran npm install.
So that seems very similar to what we duplicated in terms of
the
outcome. Yeah.
Anyway, it sounds like we have a better solution in the works here that
it's just what does it get
pre-NPM 5 needs. So this may be a moot point.
Yeah. Is this a minor, is this like an improvement, or are we patching the behavior we expect?
NPM 6 will install everything in your package lock. If you do npm install foo, it installs everything from your package lock. So I don't think did change from V6, or there's something else to the use case.
If that's the actual behavior in V6, then I'm confused, because I didn't go try and reproduce this myself, but both the issue and the user in IRC seem to be suggesting that NPM 6 would not install, like that if I RMRF'd a specific dependency and then I did npm install foo, that specific dependency wouldn't be restored, like necessarily in NPM 6, but it would in NPM 7. So if in fact the behavior is the same, that it literally does act like just an npm install after adding the dependency to package JSON, then I'm confused why the error was reported, but the filtered behavior still sounds like the correct thing and the better thing for npm to do regardless.
Oh, I mean, it sounds like a cool feature, but I mean, what that tends, so if this was the way that NPM 6 behaved, which it is not, unless there's some other context here that I'm missing. I just tested it while Rebecca was talking. But if NPM 6 and NPM 7 are the same, then changing it by default in NPM 7 is a pretty drastic move, right? Because I'm willing to bet that there's somebody out there, depending on the fact that they can just add a new dep and also get all of their other deps.
Right.
It could still be opt-in as a feature, and that seems valuable. I mean, this person wants it, so there's greater than 0 people who would benefit.
But I would say that if it didn't do this in NPM 6 and this sort of install everything behavior were new in NPM 7, then I wouldn't expect anyone to be relying on it yet.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Be safely considered a bug fix.
Yeah. Okay. Wes, I see you have your hand up, and then Gar.
Hey, sorry I was late, so I'm sorry if this was covered already, but one of the things when I read this originally that came to mind is the fact that NPM, and again, I don't know if it's 6 or 7 or if there's a difference there, but I know for sure 7 does, because it's been hitting me a bunch lately. When it does make those other changes to the tree, that includes things like changing links. So like say you had just recently linked a couple of packages into your local thing and then you added a new dependency, it will go ahead and swap those out for a registry dep. And that's a pretty disruptive workflow. So even if it's not just whether there's a difference or not between NPM 6 and 7, and whether or not this is a feature or a bug that we'd want to like address, the current workflow is pretty disruptive if you're doing like local package development between a few different packages. So I would like to see this get addressed one way or the other. If we make it a flag, if it was a config, like I would turn it on everything, because I never want that behavior personally, right? So like I would definitely love to see this push forward with obvious changes to the RFC to address the fact that it maybe is inaccurately reported.
Gar, did you want to top up?
Yeah, I'm just reading the RFC here, and I want to take a step back, and I want to make sure that what we're talking about solves the root problem here, right? They're saying that what they're trying to do is have common deps in a project, and then install them into each workspace, reducing install time and disk usage. The connection between that and their request is tenuous to me. They're trying to solve this problem this one way and it doesn't work. So if they added this, they could solve that problem that one way. But like, is this the way to solve that problem?
Yeah. I think Isaac noted, and I think if this is the same person, there was a previous issue talking about like different depths that sets of depths that you could install. And I think I noted as well, once we add workspace awareness to npm install, you'll be able to essentially scope, let's say your build or dev or your server depths into like a workspace essentially, and then be able to essentially have a scope install. So that might be the feedback we give for this specific RFC. If we don't want to change this to, as you're saying, Gar, like kind of like, oh my goodness, what's the name? What's the word? But essentially like bloat or change the actual scope of what they're trying to do. But it does sound like, oh, there's a real RFC here that could be made for the filtered node install.
Okay, I found the extra bit of context. It is if you do not have a lock file, then npm 6 would not install everything. And npm 7 will, if you don't have a lock file, still just build as much as it can based on starting with your root project.
That makes more sense, since I never have a lock file in any of my published packages. That seems like the difference. But like, so that to me then sounds like we could do a semver patch when no lock file is present to do the filtered approach. But it sounds like we wouldn't be able to do that when a lock file is present, because 6 and 7 both did the same thing.
It's a bad idea, in my opinion, to have npm behave significantly differently if there's a lock file versus if there isn't, right? In both
While I agree with that, there's a lot of precedent where it doesn't like npm audit.
Yeah, we should be able to audit reified package trees as well, just as well as we can audit or an ideal tree that has no lock file. Like,
yeah,
part of the one of the somewhat implicit, somewhat explicit design goals of Arborist is that a lock file is a helper. It gets us information about intent, and it gets us information about kind of skips a big part of the build ideal tree process. But if we don't have a lock file, we use whatever information we have, whether that's a yarn lock or what's reified on disk or what have you, or just a package JSON.
So given that as a constraint, which makes sense to me, then it seems like we should have some sort of flag or config or whatever to allow people to opt into this, whether they have a lock file or not. And then given that that behavior is probably what I think most people would want, perhaps npm 8 could flip the default of that flag.
I'm not sure it is what most people would want, because it's in the default with npm 6 is that you get a lock file. And the behavior in npm 6 is that if you have a lock file, npm install foo will install everything. So you know, I always find it's best to kind of assume that the overwhelming majority of users are doing the default thing, right?
Right, but I think it's, my assumption would be that they're all running npm install long before they're typing npm install foo. Meaning, I think that the users that are actually depending on npm install foo installing everything, I can't imagine that anyone's knowingly doing that. Even if they all have a lock file, even if, you know,
Well,
I think everyone's installing first and then adding packages after.
that's a
It's, I mean, it's an unverifiable claim either direction, but like, that's my intuition.
what is not an unverifiable claim, though, is that in the default case, if you have installed with npm6 and then you rmrf node modules and then you npm install foo, you get all of your dependencies installed.
Sure.
So if we change that behavior as a default, I'm not sure that most people want this. Like,
I mean, we could look into it, right, and consider changing the default in the future. But like, I think that the number of people who RMRF node modules is also very small. So, like, I think the default case is not going to include any manual messing with node modules. In my opinion.
Just to be mindful of time here, it sounds like maybe Wes and Jordan, you both said that you would potentially use this and this would be helpful. So
100% of the time, yeah.
Maybe either one of you could either recommend the changes to this RFC or create a new one that explicitly talks, or it might be easier to start a new one that just is like, here's a flag that you can pass to install to stabilize this this behavior, or to change it to what you want, like insert it in terms of the filtered node experience, right? Filtered node install experience. Yeah. Okay.
Maybe could we start with just a little discussion in the existing thread just to see, you know,
there's an XY problem happening here. Like, let's dig into the actual problem that they're trying to solve with a filtered install, and then maybe make a generic, like, here is how you can filter your reification and expose that to the users. That's Sem for Miner. That would give Jordan and Wes and this person that particular tool. But there's, I wouldn't just kind of implement as requested. Exactly.
So I'm just taking notes. Okay. So if there's any more feedback or commentary, feel free to give or comment on the RFC itself, basically. Moving on to issue 363. This is npm ignore pragma to include .gitignore. This is by Jordan. Essentially, well, I'll let you explain your thoughts on this issue.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, the problem is that although opinions may differ, I find using the files array incredibly dangerous, because I would much rather suffer the consequence of I have to rotate a secret than suffer the consequence of I broke a single user ever by accidentally omitting a file. Thus, I use npm ignore in 300 some odd packages. That requires me to duplicate gitignore and manually keep them somewhat in sync whenever I, whenever I make file system related changes. I have to make sure that they're either present or absent as expected in gitignore and npm ignore, like synchronous or together. And what would make much more sense to me and be much more simple is if there was some way I could have a file be effectively a diff on top of gitignore, so that if you concat gitignore and this other contents together, you get npm ignore automatically, because then my better npm ignore file would essentially just always be like gitignore, but like negate out the build output directory, and things of that nature, or like negate out the tests, perhaps, things like that. I am very interested in doing this backwards compatibly, because my personal use case won't be solved if I have to wait 10 years to be able to use it exclusively. And I'm aware that there's not a simple implementation solution to do it. So one thing I thought of as a category was if there's any sort of npm ignore syntax that you could use that would crash an npm version that didn't know how to handle it, then that syntax is what we could use to put the npm ignore file into better mode. And that way the wrong thing wouldn't happen on older npms. It would just tell you like some error. But there doesn't appear to be any such syntax. And then similarly, an alternative file wouldn't really work because I'd still then have to have crap npm ignore and good npm ignore in all my projects if I wanted to make sure that the wrong thing didn't happen on an older version of npm. So I don't have a magic solution, but I think it would be a really helpful thing for the ecosystem to be able to provide this functionality somehow.
Yeah. And the current, as far as I remember, the current implementation is if there's no npm ignore, we actually do fall back to get ignore, which feels like
right.
npm ignore should have extended essentially get ignore, like those two.
Yeah, like if we had a time
Well,
machine, I think that's always what it should have done.
Well, except that it's a pretty common use case to git ignore lib and npm ignore source and then build lib from source.
Right, but
So
given that negations have always existed in that syntax, I think it would have been pretty straightforward to
negations have not always existed in
No?
that syntax. No, it
in
was
git ignore.
in npm ignore. It was long story. Another day.
Okay,
Yeah,
but
let's-
I mean,
yeah.
we don't have a time machine, so it's irrelevant. But I guess assuming that git ignores negation syntax what is originally supported, then that would have been a viable original implementation, I think.
Mhm.
But that ship has long since sailed. So the only other idea I can think of besides syntax, that crashes old stuff, an alternative file, which is not good for the reasons mentioned, would be, I suppose, a package JSON field, although I don't like the idea of adding one. But like that still doesn't really help me if I have to still maintain the npm ignore file. So
I mean,
you
could create a
go ahead.
you could create a files array where the first entry in files is star and then every other entry is a bang with the things you don't want to include.
Does that respect git ignore?
No.
Like the whole value is
during
that
publish,
git ignore
yeah.
should always exists and is always the most important source of truth. And I basically always want to diff off of git ignore.
Yeah, so you want
I never want to ignore the git ignore.
You want to npm ignore my git ignore file ignores plus XYZ.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and maybe minus ABC. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's just like I have never found a use case where I actually want to ignore my git ignore list from scratch. Every single time without exception, I always want to start with that minus maybe one or two things.
Is this a place where a npm feature polyfill would work, where like we have a tiny script that people can npx or npm exec that does the correct thing, and then that kind of provides that backwards compatibility?
You're saying new npm would use this, or old npm would have to use it?
So old npm would have to use that, right?
If there's a way to configurably force an old npm to do that, then that might be a viable solution. I don't want to rely on people remembering stuff.
So I'm wondering, is this like a check that you want to do as well, though? Like how you're saying today, the way that you facilitate this is you have to like keep these things in sync. You have to like diff these. If we were to provide something to you in terms of, we've already talked about publish prompts before, like if it was like publish check, like publish validation, then you could like potentially utilize that to write that condition that you could.
The problem is that I don't know how I could represent the intent of like just inject here the stuff from git ignore, right? Like,
well, you can modify the package JSON from the git ignore and the npm ignore. You can modify the files array in package JSON from those two before you publish.
You could also have a pre-published script that builds your .npm ignore file, and that could be, you could build that with make. You could do anything, right?
Right.
Yeah, and if That's true. So yeah, and then if the end result here is that that's what I'd be forced to do, then so be it. I may end up doing that, but it would seem to like for anyone who is already using npm ignore, who wants an exclude list approach instead of an include list approach, like the current way it works is insufficient for, I think, everyone. And what I'm proposing, I think, would be better for everyone in that group. You know, I'm sure there's somebody will pop out of the woodwork and say they actually like the current behavior, but like I've still never seen an example. So like it would seem very unfortunate to me if we ended up concluding that this would be like concretely better in every case, but we can't but there's no great way to do it. So do it yourself, even though that is a viable workaround.
Yeah. Gar, you have your hand up?
How important is backwards compatibility here? I mean, because it's during publish, right? I would assume you're not publishing with old versions of npm.
I personally do not, but I do not want to assume that somebody else on my project is doing that. So in fact, I have a pre-published script in all my 300 packages now, because I never want to assume someone's using npm 7 or 6 even, and have the wrong thing be published.
Okay. Well, if this was a feature flag, an additive parse, just hey npm parse the npm additively,
right?
That was not backwardly compatible. And if they're running an old npm, then there's issues. But that
to clarify, what I actually want is backwards incompatibility, right? I want something that will loudly fail older npms. So normally what I would want is older stuff to work still. What I actually want is for it to fail so that the wrong thing doesn't happen.
It's really weird hearing Jordan say those words.
Oh, I've come to expect it. Jordan wants everybody else's software to always work no matter what, and his own software to almost never work.
That is about right. Yeah, I want the stuff I give to other people to work as well as possible, and the stuff I use for myself to be as restricted as possible.
You are greedy with your errors. You only want crashes on your machine and nowhere else in the world.
That's right.
Yeah. So I think crashing a behavior that's going to fail on old npms, it's going to be on you to just kind of make sure you don't do that, right? But yeah, having a, like Gar said, having a flag that's additive, like that would be really easy. And then that opens the door to, yeah, we'll just put a pragma in .npm ignore that does that. I think actually, you know, just having it even as like a comment syntax, like pound bang include .get ignore, like that's fine. And that'll be ignored by old npms. So if you install with an old npm, it'll be maybe a, you know, half empty package or something, or a package that includes all your get ignored stuff. But at least moving forward, you know, it saves us there. I don't think it even needs to be a flag in the CLI. It could just be a thing that a feature we implement, and hey, it's only supported as of 7.12 or whatever.
So the only ask I think that's totally workable. The only ask I would have is that there's something that I can run in older npms to reliably determine if they support this or not without having to do version checking. If there's anything I can just like I'm happy to put something in the pre-published script or whatever that just says like effectively, if npm doesn't support this feature, crap out. But like I need a way to do that, and
I feel like that sounds like a good generic RFC of checking support.
Yeah.
But it's like I need it to work in npms that we can no longer change. So
well, so here's the nice thing about that. If we had let's say we added a new top level command, or just tacked it onto, you know, if you run npm versions, right now we just dump the version of npm and node and all the nodes things. If we made that look more like, you know, when you run vim -- version, right, it prints out like every switch that it was configured with, so that you can deterministically see like which features have been turned on or off. A lot of tools do this. Like if we started plopping more stuff in that, then okay, you run npm versions --JSON, you pipe that to a thing that checks if this flag is set, and if not, it fails. That's pretty straightforward. Now it's going to accrete, right? It's going to accumulate a lot of junk over time. if we start saying, well, every new feature we add, we're going to make the output of this command a little bigger, I could see that getting out of hand. But maybe it's fine. I don't know. That is a new RFC though.
You muted, Jordan.
Yeah. Instead of a list, it could even just be a single command where I say like npm, like, do you support? And I give a string, and then it just exits 0 or not, because then an npm that doesn't have that command will exit non-zero. And that works out nicely.
So that would be another kind of nice sugar on top of that. So you don't have to dump the whole thing and parse it. You could just check for it.
Right.
You know,
especially since these are mostly shell
or whatever,
commands, and I don't want to have to do JSON parsing in the shell.
I like Darcy's suggestion.
I've been trying to get us to relook at Doctor, and which feels like, you know, these types of things like the sanity checks, etc. Like I feel like there's a case for us to look at Doctor, figure out if it, like, what feature set it supports, why we have those checks in place, and then also maybe expand it, right? It needs polish, but potentially npm Doctor and then supports, you know, like a subcommand, and then for that in the future, that like you literally can rely on that to just fail, like for config. Thing to check. Doctor thing to check even. So more arbitrary checks, would be nice. It feels like there could be a lot of improvements made to npm Doctor, which we could, you know, expand upon, and that would be the right scope for that kind of like validation. But that feels a little bit different. Rick, I know you have to drop. Was there anything specific you want to mention before you drop?
No. I was just looking at the rest of the things, and I'll just keep my eyes open. Thanks, guys.
Awesome.
Cheers.
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 Okay. Just to be sensitive to time as well, because there's about 20 minutes left. If we have any other feedback we want to give on like this RFC, like this issue and thread, and maybe even give some context from this conversation back to that issue, would be great. It sounds like there's a couple ideas that could sprout an RFC. Specifically, Jordan, if you think that there's something you'd like that we could have that would essentially help us in the future too, like something like that validation or supports, and if there's a way that we could like somehow backport that or have an identifier for you to use. And
I mean, I think if folks are amenable, I can write an RFC for something like npm Doctor supports, and then if that can land first, then we could proceed with the npm ignore stuff. That would work great for me.
Cool. Okay. Moving on then to RFC 343. So this is Roy's, unfortunately he's out this week, but it's essentially the idea of auto switching the context based on the current, or switching, I think, the current working directory when we're running workspace commands. So the idea would be here, and I think I've explained this before, that if I were to be running a workspace command inside of, or if I'd be running a command inside of a workspace, like npm install, it would actually desugar to as if I were running that in the root of my workspace. So it would be npm install -- workspace, whatever that workspace was. And so that was the idea behind this. And I think that we discussed the last time we talked about this, Jordan, you brought up, and it looks like you even added it here in terms of defining a workspace root or somehow making that connection explicit within the actual workspace back to the parent. I'm not sure if there's any other conversations. Wes, you were the last one to add, note or comment on this. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we currently it's implemented not this way. Currently, we don't support this, so this would be like a net new capability. But I'm not sure if anybody has any comments on this.
So my only comment on this was it is extremely hazardous and it is extremely perilous to say, oh, I'm in a folder and you're running npm install. let me just walk up your directory tree and see if this folder is actually a workspace, or if, you know what I mean, and try to just infer it without making any changes locally.
You mean
would
implicitly?
Actually, if
without making any explicit changes, to just implicitly infer that we're in a workspace. We kind of tossed it about and talked about it, but it's really, really hazardous. You know, there's already some cases like that where we walk way further up the folder tree than we really ought to. So one thing that we had, or one idea that occurred to me, as we put some definitive marker in the workspace that says this is a workspace and its root is X. What that means is, though, that gets away from, you know, Wes's kind of suggested design constraint, which we've managed to meet so far, which is that if I have a folder and I have a bunch of just checked out projects, they don't need to know that they're workspaces. They don't need to have anything in them to define them as workspaces. And I can run workspace commands and have it, you know, build their package trees in a way that will work with them and pass their tests. In this case, we would have to put some kind of marker in that folder to say, this is where you need to go look for the root project. So that kind of gets us away from that. You know, it's a violation of that constraint somewhat. Yep, that's it. That's it for me.
So are you basically saying you're in favor of Jordan's suggestion, then making like an explicit file that points to the root? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, I'm offering that as, I don't know if I'm in favor of it in any case. I can see the value, but I'm more just saying, like, that is the way that we could do this this proposal, right? Like in a way that's not hazardous, but it does.
I mean,
and I'm calling out that it does violate that prior kind of design constraint.
I would also, because we brought this up like preemptively, I'm wondering like how time sensitive this really is. Like so far, like not that many people have complained, maybe because we're still slowly seeing adoption of our workspace implementation. So, and we're rolling out more and more command support. So
I guess would be that. I know for sure some of the things that are not yet supported are just blockers for adoption, at least most of the main projects at Netflix, though. So you're not going to get, I haven't been able to get much feedback other than, it installs. You know, so we'll need those commands before we can know whether this is really a priority or not.
Right. It does seem like it's, this is for an improved developer experience, right? If you like, if your expectation, also like, what's your expectation inside of a workspace? Like, do you want, for whatever reason, just to install in place like that folder or run that command explicitly in that directory, and not like, you might, I would think that that's what I'm trying to do in that case. Like I would actually want that, and I wouldn't like the fact that that actually changed, like that behavior changed, unless there was some explicit config, as Jordan and Isaac have said, right?
I think one thing that is a requirement, not just is the thing I mentioned here, where you should be able to install a sibling package without having to go somewhere else. And I think that's a user experience requirement, because I don't think people, because the other workflow would be edit your package JSON, delete your lock file, and then rerun. Like, I'm not actually sure what the workflow would be if you're installing a sibling package without that feature. And I doubt most users are going to be able to figure it out. And if that is the workflow, that's also pretty dangerous, because deleting a lock file, you know, just to get a new package installed seems.
What is, when you say sibling package, you mean I have workspace A and I have workspace B, and I want to say that A now depends on B.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right, because what you want is it to set up the proper links.
So what happens? So yeah, there's a question. There's an open. I have a draft PR, which is the last on the agenda. We probably won't get to talk about kind of how we link, or which things are shared and which things are not, and so on. But would it work to do npm install b dash dash, yeah, npm install dot slash b dash dash workspace equals a?
That's
Like that
yeah.
should do that, right?
Yeah, what I just typed in chat, I think should do exactly what you're talking about, Wes, here once, like in a little bit, by the way. So like in like, hopefully the next, like definitely by the end of this quarter, but even within the next month, we have the ability to do this today. Our Isaac did the work in Arborist to actually have the support. We just need to wire up all the our NPMI. Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
I was just specifically saying it doesn't work currently in the currently released version.
Yes.
Yeah.
Huh, I thought that it did.
It won't
Maybe
know
there's-
because it doesn't support workspaces or workspace yet.
Oh, okay. Well, there's some additional wiring up work.
Wait a sec, actually though, there's one other detail here. I was thinking you should be able to run this in the sub package, but I think this command has to be run from the workspace root, correct?
Yeah, so right now,
So
everything
that's what we're talking about.
everything that's workspace aware today has to be run from the workspace project root,
Right, okay.
because we don't know that you're in a workspace, you're just in a folder.
Yeah, and so if we add the dash dash workspace dash root configuration, we would then be able to run it from the child package, but you'd have to specify workspace root, dot dot slash or something.
Right, or prefix dot dot slash would actually be the same thing.
So it sounds like just again, I'd like to try to get to a couple of those last items here. For folks that are interested in this, we'll probably keep it open for now. It sounds like there's no immediate change that we're going to move forward with. Also, it would be great to have Roy back to actually speak to this, since I think he hasn't been able to join the last few times that we've actually talked to this. So we'll leave it open for now, and feel free to add comments in the PR itself. So moving on, Nilf had put together RFC 336, the where config parameter for npm exec and npm config. Essentially, we talked about just the changing in the name. This seems rather uncontentious. I could be wrong. Nilf, did you also, if you're on, did you want to also just give a high level synopsis?
Sure. So high level, right now, npm config, we have npm config set, and it is by default changing your user level config. You can pass -- global and we'll change your global config. There's no way to use npm config set to modify a project level config. So if you needed to do something like, say, in this project, this scope maps to this registry, there is not a programmatic way to do that with the CLI. So the way that I was thinking of fixing it is using -- where. So you could specify exactly which config you want to make changes to. It would also apply to npm config get, because it would allow you, instead of seeing a list of all of your configs merged together, you could list the contents of just one of them. Then the other place where this seems like it would really have some advantages is in npm exec. One of the things that we get a lot of questions about is when something's installed and you run it with npx, what does it actually run? And right now it is kind of a strange cascade of things. It checks your global bins, it checks your local bins, then it sees if it's a package name, tries to install it, sees if there's a bin it can run. And the order of precedence is not really clear. And for some commands like TypeScript, where the name of the package is TypeScript, but the name of the bin is TSC, it becomes even more confusing because you can't just run it. So the goal there was -- where would allow you to say specifically run the bin that's in my local project, or run the global bin, or run it by fetching this package name. So instead of having some kind of hand wavy fallbacks, a user can say, this is the one I want, run that. And that is pretty much the whole thing. There was some bike shedding about what we would name the parameter. Where seemed to make sense to me. It is used internally in some spots. and in a couple of dependencies, but it didn't seem like it was super widespread. So I don't think that's a blocker.
Yeah, I think that was the only thing.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any like negative feedback to this? Any like reason we would push back on this other than the name?
Yeah, other than the name, this is great.
Okay, so maybe we can just come up with a poll or something for a few different names and see which one folks prefer, like location or be very, very explicit, like yeah.
And to be clear, I don't think there's any problem with the word where. I think that's quite appropriate here. I think the problem is that due to the design of npm config and how a config flag applies to every command, that it needs to be named in such a way that it's clear that it only applies to this one command.
Config location might be
Well,
whatever.
so it's actually two commands though, at least, because we have
Sure.
we have it for exec as well.
So yeah, just named in such a way so that there's no confusion as to what it will do on an unrelated command, I guess.
It would, yeah, it would be weird if I did npm install foo -- where equals global. Like,
Yeah,
is that installing it globally or what?
Yeah. Gar, I saw you had your hand up for a second, but maybe
Well, you kind of said what I said. It should really config level. Like the name needs to actually really describe what it's doing here.
Yeah.
Okay, so it could be that this ends up being two separate parameters then, because one is the location to a config and one is the source of
exact location and config location. Yeah.
Sure. Config scope or config level, like because the location is because we refer to them as like user global package level, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But it's not taking a path, so calling it location is kind of misleading.
Yeah. Unless we made it so that it can take a path, and I don't know that we want to do that.
Right, and then what if you give it a path which is not a config file we manage? Like, should it just be a path to an npm-rc file? And there's like
a set. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is
defined set.
We don't need to bike shed it here. This is the bike shed we need to have though.
Yep.
Okay, great. I'll put an action there for that. Tierney, did you want to quickly update on 182?
Quick update. I rewrote the RFC to be focused on using licensee. There's some changes in there. It also based off. So I have retained it as npm audit license. I do think that's the better API. I think that's the better API. But I'm not hard attached to it. But based on some of Jordan's feedback, I did also add an additional commands of flag section to make it so no audit does both. So this would also mean we add npm audit security to just do security stuff, and no audit security and no audit license. And then no audit does both. Those are all flags, and npm audit would do both.
I mean, what would be nice is if there was a way that worked in old NPMs that disabled security audits, but still allowed new NPMs to show licensing audits. Because that's my preferred.
Well,
workflow.
it would, right? Because no security audit. Oh, I see what you mean. So if you get no audit in old NPM, it's gonna audit, not audit licenses.
Which is what I have all over the place because I don't want to see false positives.
I mean, there's a way to construct that that setup probably so that we can say explicitly, I do want to audit licenses.
Yeah. Or just audit or just like yeah.
But I think doing it under the audit command space kind of makes sense though. I agree.
I would specifically I think this was also a note that both Kat and Rebecca shared with me, or maybe it was just Kat, I don't know, it was someone that originally that was kind of the scope of audit, and I know that might have changed, but like to be able to expand that and have it be more of a broad range rather than just CVEs.
Yeah, what happens if you do npm audit fix and the only problem is a license? Is there any way to fix a license problem?
No,
probably not, right?
Like, right, yeah, it's not something you can fix, right? I mean that would just yeet the module. like if
Remove
you
the
want to
depth.
do that, but yeah.
It sends an email to the module owner
Well,
asking them to.
Hold on, that's not
New
entirely
license.
true.
Yeah.
If you have version 1.2.3 of something and it's like licensed as GPL, and version 1.2.4 exists and is licensed as MIT, and you've said you only want MIT, then the fix is upgrade to 1.2.4.
But wait, could that actually be that would have to be reversed, right? Because if it's
Oh,
GPL,
can't
it can't
happen.
go to
It
MIT.
can't go. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
it can't go from
yeah,
GPL to MIT. But
can't
the,
go
It
from
wouldn't be
GPL to
appropriate to
MIT.
do so in a patch, but it absolutely could.
Can
No,
it? Can you? Sorry. Anyway, we don't need to get into licensing.
But yeah,
That's-
whatever
yeah,
the
yeah.
direction. I mean, what I mean is that there
Yeah.
could be something could be suddenly dual licensed in the next version, and the next version would satisfy. And so that's something a fix could do, and it'd be probably nice to do that, because then it reduces the amount of manual license legwork one has to do to make the lawyers happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can add that. I am happy to add that to the additional commands of flag sections.
Awesome. Good to, great.
Yep.
So unfortunately, we had two other items which we probably won't get to since we're essentially at time. But feel free to comment on 156, the RFC optional install. And Isaac's put on here a net new RFC, which is defining dependencies and how they are shared. So Jordan, I know you'll be interested in this. And it's, I think, Isaac, if you want to speak to this, I know you're not super stoked with the implementation. So
this is just discussing the user experience and sort of the defaults and the semantics of like what we share and when between workspace projects. I actively hate the kind of straw proposal package.json syntax for defining which things get isolated and which ones don't. So burn that all down, give me a better way, because I will be really sad if this is what we land on.
Yeah, that's a good caveat. Okay, with that said, we'll leave those on the agenda. Appreciate everybody joining today, and hopefully we can keep working on this stuff together async. And we'll be back again next week, and hopefully you all have a great day. Thanks.
Bye.